Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we are going to be talking about something extremely cool, and that is the most recent Eldari triumph at AGT. Now, as you guys know, I haven't covered these videos in a while, truthfully because they got kind of boring. I was doing a lot of these for quite a bit of time earlier on in the edition, and it just seemed like most of the lists were kind of just the same. And I really wanted to cover this one in particular because this one is an absolute Giga Chad Eldari list. I'm talking throw all the conventions out the window type of thing and just honestly perform. So, what do I mean by that? Well, this list is going to be different, and you guys are going to notice that right off the bat. It includes a lot of units that are commonly referred to in the Eldari community as trash units, or units that aren't competitive or aren't very good. You can run them for fun, but when it comes to competitive play, they don't have a place. So I've kind of made videos about these units in the past, and their strengths and merits and what they can do well and stuff like that. And I really have advocated for some of these units, and I'm glad to see that somebody has finally had the balls to take them to a tournament and absolutely slap the tournament with it. So, we're going to do a deep dive analysis into the list that this player brought and really kind of undo some of the maybe conventions that Eldari players have, especially after the past balance data slate and points changes. So, what are we going to be looking at in this video specifically? Well, we're going to discuss the event itself. It was a grand tournament after all, so we do need to get into the specifics there. We do need to talk about the third place Eldari list, played by Lucas Stitt, with some analysis. By the way, congratulations to Lucas. That was an excellent performance at the tournament, and your list was awesome, dude. It was a real banger. And he did win third place, but we will talk about that because, it was very close to being a, first place victory. And we're also going to speak about the implications for competitive play. So, what did the event look like? Well, the event was the Queen City Orktoberfest 2024. I always loved that play on words. I remember when I was a kid growing up, my mom took a look at the GW website for October, and it was spelled Orktober, and she was like, look at that, their editors must not be getting paid that well. And I just had to laugh at that because obviously it's a play on words, but because she's not a nerd like me, she didn't understand. It was on October 26th to 27th, so this last weekend, and it was in Springfield, Missouri, USA. Hometown USA, that's where I live, so not Springfield, Missouri, but I live in the United States. So it was good to see a Eldari player win a tournament in the US. It had 31 players total, which is a pretty decent size GT. It's not the biggest of GTs, but it is pretty decent size. And I think for a lot of players as well, when they look at this player size, they immediately dismiss the event. But this was still a 5-round event. It wasn't an RTT. It wasn't a smaller 3-round event or whatever. It was full 5 rounds, and it was competitive. There were some really good players there, and enough said, right? Just because a GT doesn't have hundreds of players doesn't mean it's not a competitive event. So, what happened in the tournament? Well, Lucas Stitt and Eldari Giga Chad took third place with 4 wins and only 1 loss. And by the way, the loss was to the Votann player, who actually won the whole thing and kind of sparked a little bit of interest in Votann again because of the recent buffs. So, yeah, lost the game, but at the same time, won 4 games against very competitive armies. And here's the list. And some of you may be looking at this and thinking, how can somebody win with something like this, right? So let's go through it, and I'm going to talk about it. And then we're going to, do some quick analysis, and I'll talk about each and every unit and why I think this list was successful. So for the characters, he has a Zerman. A Zerman is, pretty good. He's good fighter. He gives free overwatch to his unit of Dire Avengers, so that's always nice. He's, pretty good at shooting. He has damage to weapons. So, not bad. Autarch Wayleaper has the fusion gun, has the Starglaive, Howling Banshee Mask, and the Phoenix Gem. That's the standard Eldari Autarch Wayleaper build there. We have the Avatar of Cain for, some mid-board action. We have the Farseer with Singing Spear and Reader of the Runes. I think maybe the Reader of the Runes was just an extra that, he put in there because didn't have quite enough points for another unit. But Reader of the Runes is useful with Guardian Defenders because whatever they roll for their Fate dice can, be re-rolled. Maybe you roll a 1 for their Fate dice pool. You could just re-roll it, get a better result. He also has Kahandras. Battle line, of course, Guardian Defenders with the Bright Lance. The other data sheets included Dire Avengers with the Exarch having an additional Shuriken Catapult. So, your 5 standard Dire Avengers with the Catapult. Of course, the Zerman's going to go with them. He also brought 2 Falcons with their new reduced points cost, Bright Lances and Shuriken Cannons. Now, here's where things get a little bit interesting. Now, of course, Dire Avengers is an interesting pick, but we have seen competitive lists bring, 5 Dire Avengers before and a Zerman. We've seen this, but what we haven't really seen is 2 units of Howling Banshees with Mirror Swords. And I actually think this unit is exceptionally good at teching into things like Imperial Guard, things that have a lot of, single wound models, Sisters of Battle as well. Howling Banshees are just excellent into. So I think those are, 2 kind of armies that I just mentioned that are pretty weak to Howling Banshees. Howling Banshees are good. A lot of people don't give them credit, but 70 points, they have Advance and Charge, which is great. They have Fights First, and Heroic Intervention. Remember, guys, there's only 1 CP now, so they can do Heroic Intervention and Fights First. Howling Banshees are a good unit. 2 units of Rangers, which, again, you don't see that often. You don't see multiple units of Rangers typically in a competitive list. But I really like that he's going full on into the, kind of wider look at the Eldari, kind of build. Shining Spears, which a lot of you guys laugh in the comments and say Shining Spears suck. When I said that the Eldari got massive buffs, Shining Spears were part of that. And I even mentioned that I think that they will occasionally see competitive play because now Shining Spears at 90 points trade very well with their Marine equivalent counterparts. And just think about it for a second, guys. Assault Intercessors are 90 points. And Shining Spears wipe the floor with them on charge. They do have a little bit of a hard time getting into combat at times, but there's a lot of opportunities for them to shine. And they're a really good unit when you can get them in. They also have really large bases, and what a lot of people don't also kind of get with Shining Spears on paper is those bases can really clog up movement lanes super well. You can charge these guys into something, basically anything in one of the movement lanes. They can do good damage to that target with Lance. And if you consider, against lighter targets, they're wounding on 4s against, anything toughness 5, toughness 6, toughness 7. They're going to wound on a 4+. That's pretty good. Anything else, they're wounding on 5s in the game. So even tough tanks are wounding on 5s. That's excellent. They can do a lot of good high EP damage, and also at the same time, they can block a movement lane. Shroud Runners are in the list as well. Shroud Runners just give great utility. Lethal hits they can pass out to different units with their range attacks. Great with Falcons. Pretty good with themselves, actually, also, so they can do some chip damage to stuff. He has 2 units of Striking Scorpions, and I haven't seen the games that he played, but this is a really good build because you can use these in Falcons to absolutely decimate units with high armor and invul saves. Especially with Kahandras. One of these units has Kahandras in it. The other one just has the Biting Blade. So I presume that Kahandras is going with the Scorpion Claw unit. And these guys can come out of the Falcons. So the Falcons stage up, just like I spoke of recently in my Mekdar list. The Falcons stage so that they can attack objectives later on in the game or attack key targets later on. Turns 3, turns 4, and so forth. And to close out the list, he has 2 Warwalkers. Both of them have Bright Lances. And I've also talked about Warwalkers being a really good unit still, especially in Pariah Nexus where their scout move and, movement can really kind of get an alpha strike on somebody if their matchup's right. Or, of course, they can retreat to safety and, close down a lane, so to speak. So, this list seems all over the place, doesn't it, guys? But I think it addresses a couple of key things that I've been kind of talking about that are really going to be the Eldar's new strength after the data slate changes. So, what are those strengths? Well, I think just looking at the list itself, this has an heavy emphasis on close combat. And if you actually notice, the Avatar of Cain and Howling Banshees synergize exceptionally well. If the Howling Banshees are hiding behind a wall near the Avatar of Cain, they can heroically intervene and get +1 to their charge roll. Similarly, if your opponent kind of doesn't go near them, the Howling Banshees can advance, +1 to their advance rolls because of the Avatar of Cain nearby, and +1 to their charge rolls, if the Avatar of Cain is still, within 6 inches. But either way, you're getting Howling Banshees with an insane threat range. They can basically reach from the midboard all the way to your opponent's deployment zone. And that gives them incredible power. Obviously, the Shining Spears are also a good example of this because the Shining Spears get +1 to their charge roll. So you can have Shining Spears kind of hanging in the background. The Avatar of Cain is more near the midboard. Shining Spears move up. And now they're getting +1 of their charge rolls into things that maybe the Avatar of Cain is having trouble dealing with. And you also have those Striking Scorpions as backup. You do have the Dire Avengers as well. Now, I want to speak about the Dire Avengers because I think people shit on Dire Avengers. They don't like them. A lot of people say, well, Swooping Hawks are just better Dire Avengers. They basically are the same as far as damage output, and Swooping Hawks get all these cool movement tricks. But what Swooping Hawks don't have is powerful Overwatch. Yes, Dire Avengers with the Zerman have really good Overwatch. They're hitting on 4+. And yeah, there's no guide in this list, but they don't need it against the kind of targets that they're probably going to be trying to kill and neutralize. So if you really boil it down and think about it, Dire Avengers with the Zerman, just 5 of them, if you're going against something like Tempestus Achillans, which are this new kind of super unit. I'm going to talk about these in a future video and how to counter them. But one of their biggest counters is effective Overwatch. These guys have 18-inch Overwatch. Zerman, of course, has a little bit more. He has 24 inches on his guns. But they can do some good damage into the Achillans, to the point where they're killing at least probably half the unit when they Overwatch, right? And if you think about it, Dire Avengers have 18 attacks, with the Exarch having the additional catapult, of course. You're hitting on a 4+, so maybe half of those hit. 3 of them automatically go through because of lethal hits. Maybe a Zerman gets 1 lethal hit and 2 more additional hits. So you're rolling 8 wounds. You're wounding on 3s. Probably with a reroll to wound because of the ability, you're getting about 6. And that's 3 more Achillans, just gone. And as for the lethals, that's going to be 2 more gone. So that's half the unit. That's 5 out of 10 models. You're crippling that unit's ability to do anything against your other aspect warriors. Like, Squad of Achillans comes down, they can basically pick out anything. They can kill Howling Banshees, they can kill Rangers, they can even threaten your Shining Spears. If you have a nice Overwatch bubble, though, of Dire Avengers, they can't do that anymore. They come down and they trade badly with whatever they shoot at. They're no longer able to take out what they want to take out. So that's pretty awesome. Did Lucas use the unit in this way? Honestly, I don't know. I hate to say it, but I haven't actually watched the specific videos of his games. I didn't have access to it. I couldn't find it on YouTube anywhere. But that's kind of my prediction as to why this unit is in the list. Good Overwatch, good control in the backfield. I assume that maybe in some matchups you'd want to put them in the Falcon, but maybe not. They're good either way. And I think when you look at a list like this, it looks wacky when you look at it, right? It looks like just a bunch of different melee units. But I think it works. And I think the reason why it works is because our melee units, despite what players might think out there, and some of the ingrained thoughts that we have, are actually pretty good, especially now. Our melee units did not get a points increase, right? Howling Banshees remained 70 points. Striking Scorpions remained 65. We didn't get any point increases on these units, despite them performing well in competitive play. And we got a bunch of other buffs. Falcons got a points decrease. And in previous patches, other units got a points decrease as well. And if you look at this list, this type of list wasn't possible in the beginning of the edition because it would have just been way too expensive to run. Now that everything's cheaper, Striking Scorpions, Howling Banshees, Falcons, this kind of wide list with an emphasis on close combat is really powerful. So, what are the implications for competitive play? I know some of you guys might be thinking, well, this might be a one-off. This might be, Lucas might just be an Eldari savant. He could probably win with anything, he puts together. But I really don't think that's quite the case. I think he's obviously a very capable and good player. But I think this also speaks to the strengths of Eldari combat. I think that wider Eldari armies with a focus on combat can actually be extremely good. I've talked about this a few times on the channel, but I wasn't quite convinced myself. I thought it could be good. On paper, in theory, a combat style Eldari list does seem good. Or, even a list with a good combat focus, but has also range units to support, seems good on paper. At least to me it did, because of the, cost of everything. But now, after the changes, I think it could be even better. Of course, now it's kind of proven that it could be good because it's won a GT. Lucas, and by the way, I consider anything in the top 3 a win. If you go 4-1 at a GT, in my book, that's a victory. You might not have won the whole tournament and gotten first place, but you've certainly won the, this list is an effective Eldari build battle, right? Okay, so what other implications are there here? Well, I think the other obvious thing is that every aspect warrior in the index now is effective in their role and are competitively costed when used efficiently. And again, I might have some naysayers about this, but you have to understand that these units, and because of the meta we're in right now, a lot of these units are looking way better, right? Howling Banshees are looking way better into several matchups. Striking Scorpions were looking better and are still looking great into a lot of matchups. Shining Spears are looking way better into a lot of matchups because not only did they get a points decrease, but the, opponents that they are likely good against, Marine equivalent enemies, pretty much all got a points hike, at least the assault versions of those, which is probably what they want to hit. They want to hit the assault variants because they can prevent those units from hitting your lines. So, Shining Spears are very good at that. Shining Spears are also surprisingly durable. They have a 4+ invul save when they charge for 1 round or advance. So that's really good as well. And Dire Avengers, right? People kind of say Dire Avengers suck, and I remember I talked about them a little bit when we were talking about the rise of Green Tide. But I think they have more applications in that now, right? Especially against Imperial Guard. Dire Avengers are really good against the Guard. They're really good against things that like to deep strike, like Tempestus Scions or Tempestus Aquilans, and they're cheap. And, that's all you need is a good Overwatch, a good Overwatch threat in your backfield that can, kind of neutralize some of those 3-inch deep strikers, put them on the back heel, dissuade them from coming into your backlines for a low cost. And yeah, Zerman's in there too. So you're talking 70 points plus 115 is 185. The Overwatch itself isn't exactly going to trade up, but you have a unit that can, again, stop your opponent from doing those kind of things. And I think that's pretty good. And I think they have a lot more play now in the competitive scene than they maybe did before. And we've also seen Orcs get buffed again. We've seen Green Tide do a little better. We've seen, Orcs get a couple of changes, points changes and stuff like that make them look a lot more effective. So again, Dire Avengers are seeming to be a decent choice into those armies. And the other thing about this list that you'll notice is that there was no Swooping Hawks, there was no Warp Spiders, there was no Shadow Specters. And a lot of people came out and said, when the points changes dropped, oh, Eldari win rate, it's going to stay the same because there's been no buffs to Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders, or Shadow Specters. And honestly, maybe the Eldari win rate does kind of remain at what it is, 48%, 49%, but that's fine. Because if you think about it, we're a really hard army to play. And when you have a really high skill cap army, difficult to play, hard to master and stuff like that, you're going to have a lower win rate because you're going to have people coming into the tournaments who are maybe newer players, who, maybe are, not savants with the army, and they're not going to have the best win rate, right? And that's okay. It's not a big deal. Win rate isn't everything. But what I can tell you is that I can see lists performing well now without Swooping Hawks, Warp Spiders, or Shadow Specters. There's other units that can do the same jobs as those units for cheaper and still be effective. I mean, if you look at Lucas's list, he has none of these. He has Rangers, he has Striking Scorpions, Howling Banshees. Really, I mean, it's kind of funny actually. There's almost no hint of any of these competitive aspect warriors in the list. And in fact, instead of those units, you have units like Shining Spears, you have units like Dire Avengers with the Zerman, you have Howling Banshees, And these are units that Eldar players would normally replace with Swooping Hawks, with Warp Spiders, with Shadow Specters. So not only is that awesome, but it shows us that you can win without those units. And I've run a few lists without Swooping Hawks, and I've done fine. And I know that's just against my local group, we're maybe more semi-competitive than truly competitive players, try-hard competitive. But still, if you're able to score objectives, if you're able to, use units like Rangers or Striking Scorpions or, whatever's there at the time, even staging units can sit there and score on objectives, right? I can move a unit of Howling Banshees into a position to threaten my opponent's backfield, and at the same time, score on an objective. Because I know that if my opponent charges me with certain units, the Howling Banshees are just going to beat them down, right? They're not going to die. So that's a really important thing to note, is that sometimes we think of secondary objective scoring as very limited to certain units in our army, but actually any unit can do it. They just need to be at the right place, and they need to be in the right circumstance and situation. So, yeah, that's what I think kind of the overall implications for competitive play are. I think that every aspect warrior is good. Whether somebody argues with that or not, that's kind of an opinion at this point. It's not really objective, At the beginning of the edition, there were units that were objectively bad. comparatively, right? You could compare a lot of units in the Eldar Index and say, you know what? Honestly, the math shows this unit's better. This unit has a better ability than this unit. It just seems like this unit is better than that unit in every way, right? That's no longer the case. Every aspect warrior is pretty good, well costed, and can serve a function on the battlefield. It may be more limited than other aspect warriors, but it's powerful nonetheless. Lists can do well without those units I spoke of earlier, Swooping Hawks, Warp Fighters, and Shadow Specters. And lastly, Eldari combat can be effective. A lot of people said Eldari are a horrible combat faction, but yet you have Lucas over here, Avatar of Cain, and a bunch of aspect warriors, combat aspects, doing super well. So, yeah, Eldari combat's fine. And especially since, you've had nerfs to other Space Marine armies combat. Space Wolves, their combat got nerfed. Blood Angels, their combat got nerfed. I mean, we've seen these other armies that were overperforming get nerfed. Black Templars, my god. Black Templars, they got hit pretty good too, right? So I think Eldari combat is in a much more effective place. So, in conclusion, congrats to Lucas for an amazing run. Absolute Giga Chad Eldari list that he was running. Absolute Giga Chad. And I'm hoping that his success in the Queen City GT will rub off on the Eldari community, and people will finally start to be a little bit more daring and willing to try out new strategies, because a lot of people are kind of stuck, I think, in the Eldari community as to what's good and what's not, right? This is objectively good, this is objectively bad, and there's no in between. And I think if you look outside of the box a little bit, if you try new strategies, see how lists work together differently, then you can have a new level of success, and you can actually bring unique lists that win GTs, right? And I just want to throw this out here real quick, because I think this kind of epitomizes something that another really good player in the, I'll just say, wider Eldar community brings to the table all the time. And a lot of people have just kind of put it up to the point that he's really a savant of the game. And you guys probably know who I'm talking about, Skari, right? Dark Eldar player. And he's basically run weirdo lists that have just absolutely smashed GTs and tournaments and things like that. And people are just like, well, he's Skari, right? And that's the only reason why he's winning all these tournaments. And of course, that has a massive, a massive effect on it. But it's also because he's good at list designing and he's willing to try out new stuff. He's willing to try out different stuff. A lot of players just aren't. A lot of competitive players are in that kind of, older mindset, the, forgive me for this kind of meme, but the FUD mindset, right? Where they're kind of like, nope, this has worked for me for so long, and I've won so many tournaments with this, and even though there's been a lot of changes in the meta and my own army, I'm going to keep running a very similar kind of list because it's what I'm used to. And this is what's good, and I know it's good. And that's that's something I think we need to kind of shift as a faction. And I think we should take examples from people like Skari who are willing to, do some crazy stuff, right? Run some crazy things and actually win. Actually win GTs because they have a well-designed list that functions differently but is still effective. And I think that's exactly what Lucas has done here. So congratulations once again to Lucas. And yeah, awesome job. And I hope to see more Eldari lists like this that are winning GTs in the future. But what do you guys think about Lucas's list? Let me know in the comment section below. Am I completely off? And this is just, kind of wild hair in a sea of conformity? Let me know in the comment section. Let me know how you guys think the Eldari will do going forward. And if, Eldari with a strong combat focus is something that can work in Pariah Nexus after the changes. Alright everybody, that's going to be it for today's video. Thanks for watching. More to come later. We have a video on how to counter the Tempestus Achillans coming up. We're also going to have a couple of interviews coming up as well, talking about several topics, so stay tuned. And happy Halloween, everybody. It's the day, so happy Halloween, and I'll see you guys next time. If you do want to join the channel's Patreon, I will go ahead and leave the link in the description. Of course, with that Patreon free trial, you get unlimited access to our Discord community, which is a community of Eldar players and enthusiasts who like talking about strategies, tactics, and of course hobbying. I will leave the link for that in the description below. Also, check out my channel store page and Amazon affiliate link. You can get some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon, or you can grab some Eldar inspired apparel on my channel store page. So stay tuned, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody, and peace out.